Edwin Diaz has finally completed his 10-game suspension, but his return alone can't fix what's wrong with the Mets right now.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, Edwin Diaz is finally done with his 10-game suspension. He can be back in the Mets bullpen on Saturday. He will be back in the Mets bullpen on Saturday, and he is very much needed. It'll set everyone else back in line. Diaz is the closer. Garrett and Nunez can get back to setting him up, and hopefully that can stabilize what has been a very erratic unit over the week and a half that they've been without Edwin Diaz. And if you told me at the beginning of that 10-game suspension that the New York Mets would go 5-5 without him, I might have signed up for it. But I would have been looking at a slate where the Mets were about to play the Yankees for 2 games and then the Houston Astros for 3 games. The first 5 games of this stretch look to be pretty daunting, although the Yankees are playing even worse than the Mets right now. They blew a game against the Red Sox tonight that was very Mets-esque. Regardless, the math changes throughout that 10-game span because the Mets beat up on the Yankees and sweep the Subway Series. Then they beat the Houston Astros and have a concert after the game, win 7-2 in that one, and they're on a 3-game winning streak without Edwin. Since then, they lost 5 of their last 7. And you look at the games that they've lost, 3 of those games they held the lead. 2 of them, the game was tied in the 8th inning. And yet, they lost all 5. Winnable games. Granted, this one on Friday night was definitely the least winnable, and it was not the bullpen that blew it. It was Luis Severino that blew the lead early, and then the bullpen just made it look disgusting. Simplifying things to blame everything on the bullpen is probably overstating the issue, but it's the one that's glaring and is just right in our face right now when you're watching this team. They have to figure something out. Now, in this game, again, it wasn't entirely the bullpen's fault. Okay? You had, first of all, a very tough matchup for the lineup. Paul Skenes is really good. We all got to see it. Even though he didn't even have his best stuff, and the Mets made him work for it, he was there pitching in the 7th inning and looked so strong. And that's a guy that is so talented that the Pirates should be adding at this deadline and trying to go for it, because any year where you have Paul Skenes healthy, try to get that guy in the playoffs because he could take you places. That guy is really, really good. With that said, the Mets got on him a little bit early. Jeff McNeil hit one of the most surprising home runs I've ever seen, just because it was Jeff McNeil, as cold as he's been right now, hitting a home run off of a 99-mile-per-hour fastball from Skenes. Granted, that pitch got a ton of plate, and McNeil was clearly looking for it and crushed it. But that put the Mets up, and then they got another run in the 4th inning. Pete Alonso leadoff double, advances to 3rd on a sac fly from DJ Stewart. Francisco Alvarez got drilled on the elbow or the forearm area. That was scary. Seems like he's okay. He finished the game, so fingers crossed there's nothing that comes from that. Iglesias drove in Alonso with a ground ball that he was able to beat out to avoid the double play. He looked great at third base, by the way. The fact that Joey Wendell got any playing time on this team to start the season, and that both Joey Wendell and Zach Short made the team over Iglesias, is pretty funny in retrospect, but I thought he played a pretty good game. The Mets were up 2-0 early, and Severino was cruising until the 4th inning. Gives up 2 solo home runs. Now it's all even. Then in the 5th inning, he gave up a 2-run shot. Now the Mets are trailing 4-2, but there was still a roadmap to win. It was get into that Pirates bullpen, and Sevy has to hold them through 7. That was sort of how they could maybe come back. Now the Mets could not get Skenes out of the game until after the 7th. And then in the 7th, Severino had a meltdown. Now, I think things could have been different if Harrison Bader caught the fly ball that went over his head to lead off that inning. Yasmani Grandal hit one. He sort of comes in on it, didn't go back on it very hard. It really just got on him quick. And that's a ball that Bader would tell you he should have caught. That would have been 1 out. Maybe things are different, but they aren't. He gives up the double. Michael A. Taylor, who was jumping in first pitch each time. Severino never made the adjustment. He gets a base hit. Runners on first and third. And then he walks the bases loaded. What does Carlos Mendoza do to counter what's going on with that Pirates lineup the way they've been getting all over Sevy? There's some lefties coming up. So he says, you know what? I'm going to get Jake Diekman. That's my counter. Let me get Jake Diekman. Let me throw him out there. And maybe Carlos Mendoza is playing chess with his front office. Maybe Carlos Mendoza knows how bad Jake Diekman is and wants him off the roster and said, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. We're going to lose this game anyway. Let's get Diekman out there because he is going to serve up a grand slam ball, and I can just put my hands up and say, I'm trying to get him through it. I'm trying to put my veteran out there and let him pitch his way out of this. But I had a show talking about, or that opened 2 days ago. Jake Diekman's got to go. Well, now look at it. I said on that show, he's flirting with an ERA over 5. Well, now it's there. And 3 of those runs, they go to Severino, not him, on the grand slam. Severino's final line after the grand slam that Diekman gave up, 6+, didn't get any outs in the 6th. 7 runs allowed on 9 hits, 2 walks. I mentioned before the start on yesterday's show that Luis Severino could pitch himself into the All-Star game. Well, guess what? He just pitched himself out of the All-Star game that quickly. He's got a 3.83 ERA now. So, Severino, enjoy your All-Star break. Now, Diekman, after giving up the grand slam, gave up a base hit, and he walked a batter, and it felt like he was just looking into the dugout, trying to get out of the game. I wanted no part of it. Maybe he's done. Maybe he's 37 years old. He cashed his last check. Thank you, Steve Cohen, for $4 million. I'm going to go retire. I don't know. Or maybe he ends up in the Rays bullpen again, just like after he got cut by, the White Sox last year, and he turns himself into a great pitcher again. But it ain't happening with the Mets. I'll just tell you that. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. Beyond Diekman, Ty Adcock comes on. He actually gets through that 8th inning. Gets through that 7th inning. Goes back out for the 8th. Gives up 3 home runs, including another grand slam. Luis Torrens had to get the last out of the 8th inning, and that's how bad it got because Adcock only had 45 pitches apparently, and that was his 46th pitch, and they just, all right, let's bring in Torrens. And of course, whenever you see a position player come into a 14-2 game, he gets an out easily. The Pirates set a franchise record for home runs in this game. They also did something that no team has ever done. They had a pair of players at least do something that no team has ever done in Major League Baseball history. Rowdy Tellez and Brian Reynolds became the first pair of teammates to each homer twice in the same game while also each having a grand slam. Ultimately, all losses count the same, but this was an embarrassing loss, and hopefully the Mets can bounce back from it. But really, the bigger question is, what is it going to take to solidify this bullpen? Edwin Diaz is great. Well, we'll see if he's great, but it's great to have him back at least. Beyond that, though, how else can this team get better internally? Because I don't see a trade happening until the deadline. They got to prove that they're buyers themselves with what's in-house before they go out and make a trade. So what's in-house to fix things? We're going to talk about that in the next segment. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, Prize Picks is just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for special promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stats projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fee back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Prize Picks is there to help. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime some news breaks on the Mets. You also can ask me questions anytime, and you get these starting lineups sent to your phone each day in a graphic, so you never have to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, on the same night that Jake Diekman came on in a bases-loaded no-out situation and he gave up a grand slam, Shintaro Fujinami came in a similar situation in Binghamton in Double-A. Bases loaded, nobody out. Nolan McLean got the start for the Rumble Ponies. McLean is the Mets' two-way player, hitter and pitcher, although I haven't seen him hitting much lately, so I don't know if they're starting to give up on that experiment, but he hasn't done either well lately, and Fujinami saved his bacon tonight because McLean's final line is 5 innings pitched, 2 runs, only one of them earned on 8 hits and 2 walks allowed, 5 strikeouts. In the 6th inning of that game, McLean gave up 3 straight singles, and then he walked in a run, and then Fujinami came into the game. First batter he faces, strikeout. Second batter he faces, strikeout. Third batter he faces, strikeout. He stranded all 3 runners by striking out 3 batters in a row. And now on his rehab, he has 4 scoreless appearances where he has yet to allow a hit. That is how good Fujinami has been. And granted, the first 2 came in Port St. Lucie, one in the Complex League, the other in Low A. You don't want to read too much into that. But since being in Double-A, his last 2 appearances, 6 up, 6 down, 5 strikeouts. Shintaro Fujinami is the reliever I think most of us were probably the most excited about when the Mets signed him this offseason. The reason being, he's got electric stuff. This is a guy that can touch 101 with his fastball. He's got a nasty split, throws a cutter. As a starting pitcher last year, he had like a 5-pitch mix. But those 3 pitches are really the ones that you're going to see him feature. And he has a chance to be nasty. I mean, there were stretches last year when he was in the Orioles bullpen after getting traded from the A's to the Orioles where he looked really good. Then he had some bad outings. And then early this year, he looked horrible with the Mets. He was walking the world. He was hitting batters. He was in his head. He got a late start to spring and just never looked right. Now, whatever was ailing him has been cleaned up, and they've been working with him to get out of his head a little bit, focusing so much on his mechanics and just throwing the baseball because he has great stuff that he's got to trust. Fujinami might be the guy that saves everything for the Mets. He could be. I don't know how many appearances they want to see in the minor leagues. Right now he's pitching like every 3 to 4 days, so you got to see him, if not pitch back-to-backs, at least start to pitch every other day before I think you'd be comfortable calling on him, so don't expect it tomorrow. But at some point, Fujinami could be a difference maker. So that's one guy you look at. Eric Orrs is another one, a potential guy that could come up and maybe could surprise us, who would make his debut if he was promoted this year as a rookie. But we haven't seen him yet, and he pitched on Friday night, as did Josh Walker, who's on the 40-man roster, and would be another guy that you would think they could call on if they decided to DFA Diekman. Walker would probably be the first answer as a lefty to add to the bullpen until you can bring back Danny Young if that's what you chose to do. Meanwhile, in Syracuse in this game on Friday night, where Orrs and Walker pitched, you had Tyler McGill make a start. He went 3 1/3, walked 5, gave up 4 hits, allowed 2 runs, struck out 7, and was saved by the bullpen. And the Syracuse bullpen, I swear this is the most frustrating thing ever. They went 5 2/3 scoreless in this game with guys like Josh Walker, Tyler J. pitching, and we've seen them pitch for the Mets, and it hasn't worked out. And after the game, I swear they probably weren't trolling, but I sent out a tweet about this because it felt like they were trolling the big league club. The Syracuse Mets Twitter account tweeted out the standings, or the stat, that they are 41-2 this season when they lead after 6 innings. 41-2. But the Mets can't find anyone outside of Daniel Nunez that's worth a damn on the big league roster out of that bullpen from Syracuse. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And again, when it comes to the roster moves for Saturday, I don't know what they do. They might just put Edwin Diaz on the roster, and that might be it. I don't think Jake Diekman's going to be gone immediately. Ty Adcock, yeah, maybe they get rid of him because he threw a bunch of pitches. But who's coming into the fold when, like I said, Orrs pitched, Walker pitched, Cole Sulser threw 2 innings the other night. So I don't know. I don't know who could be out. I'm not even going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on the rest of this season, particularly before the deadline. Like, what do the Mets have going for them? They have Diaz, Garrett, and Nunez. That's it. And Adrian Hauser is good in the role that they have him in. And you hope that Adam Ottavino can continue to progress based on some of the positive signs we've seen lately. So that's 5 relievers maybe. And I'd almost look at that as 4. Like Hauser and Ottavino, the count is a half each. You don't fully trust them. Maybe Fujinami is a guy, and maybe we can see him after the All-Star break, like right after the break, maybe he can get inserted into the fold. That would be like a realistic timeline. Jose Budo right now is pitching out of the bullpen. We'll see if he stays there. He could make a start on Monday if the Mets want to push Christian Scott back a day to give him extra rest. You don't know what they're going to do. And then maybe I could see David Peterson sliding into the bullpen as the left-handed reliever at some point when you get Kodai Senga back. Okay, so those are the guys that I sort of look at as, okay, maybe I could see them being successful. You add it up, it's 8 guys. And you know that you need 10 to 12 guys cycling through that bullpen to have any sort of effectiveness. I just don't see it. And when it comes to Diekman, I did a whole show on it. You can go back and watch the one from 2 days ago about why I said they got to cut the guy. It's ridiculous. And one of the frustrating things I found tonight looking at his page on MLB.com is they showed his nickname. You know what his nickname apparently is? Gut It Out. That's Jake Diekman's nickname, Gut It Out. What has he gutted out this year? I mean, man, he's been brutal. And here's another little wrinkle. I saw someone tweet this out today. Interesting note. There is a vesting option in his contract. I forgot about it. I looked it up. It's based on appearances, not innings pitched, appearances. So you look at his innings pitched this year, he's at 26 2/3. But this is an appearance-based option. If Jake Diekman hits 58 appearances on the season, he gets a vesting option for next year for $4 million again. In what world can the Mets allow him to get close to that? He'd have to be so lights out over the next 2 weeks that you want to keep him around. And honestly, I would just cut him right now. But again, there's not 2 pitchers you can grab. You could say, all right, bring in Diaz and cut Adcock and Diekman from this bullpen. But I don't know who you're grabbing right now. So it's frustrating. Jake Diekman has a 5.06 ERA right now, and he has 22 walks in 26 2/3 innings pitched. It's been brutal. And the past month has been even worse than that. Significantly worse than the past month and change. Go back to June. He has 4 strikeouts, I think, since June. And that's what he's supposed to do. You bring him into that spot in this game because you think he might be able to strike out a couple of guys who are batting from the left side. Didn't happen. So it's not going to happen on Saturday, I don't think. But I would get a couple of those arms from Syracuse fresh, get them on a plane to be there for the back half of this series in Pittsburgh. And I would cut Diekman, and I would cut Adcock for now or option him down. And then hope that Edwin Diaz can solve things for this bullpen a little bit and hope the lineup can score a ton of runs in the final 3 games in Pittsburgh. I want to talk about that, though. I want to leave you with an optimistic note after 2 segments of pessimism. So we'll get to that in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Tax Network USA. Here with Locked On Mets, we pride ourselves on giving you the latest news for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, the All-Star break, the playoffs. It's year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop coming after you for unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and can even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A+ rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/lockedon. You can also just see the link in the episode description below. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. All right, so reasons for optimism for the rest of this series. One of them, Edwin Diaz is back. So as much as you can point the finger and blame him for everything that's happened with this bullpen this season, from his ineffectiveness to the injury, to the suspension, all of it, I still believe he has good stuff. And I really think that his value to this bullpen is so immense when it sets everybody else in their proper roles. To be able to go to Reed Garrett on Thursday when it's a 0-0 game in the 8th inning, but you still have Edwin Diaz, assuming he wasn't suspended. To have been able to pitch Garrett in that spot and potentially have him get through the 8th and the 9th even, and have made it a bridge to extras for Edwin Diaz to pitch in a potential save situation, that could have been the difference in that game. And there's a lot of moments like that where guys have to pitch earlier or later than you want them to. And you just get into this spot where your bullpen is constantly trying to put guys into roles that don't fit. We saw it all last year, where had the Mets had a healthy Edwin Diaz in 2023 and David Robertson would have been allowed to be the 8th inning guy, I think the Mets are at least not sellers of the deadline and definitely way more in the mix. So Edwin Diaz being back is huge. And having arrested Nunez, Garrett, and right now Adam Ottavino, that gives me some hope that if this team has a lead over the next couple days, they'll be able to hold on to it, hopefully. Now, you also look at the pitching matchups. David Peterson versus Bailey Falter on Saturday. Falter has a 3.87 ERA on the year. He has pitched a little bit better at home, and we'll see if that's going to hold up. Against the Mets earlier this year, he gave up a couple of runs and got knocked out of the game after I think it was 4 innings pitched. So I honestly think this is a guy the Mets should be able to do damage off of. They have a way better lineup now than the one that scored some runs off of him earlier in the season. You have JD Martinez and Mark Vientos into the fold. I think they're going to be able to do well against Falter. And I'm looking forward to seeing David Peterson pitch again because he's been pretty good his last couple times out. So I think that's a pretty decent matchup that the Mets have maybe a slight edge on, or at least close to a draw, but they have a far better lineup than Pittsburgh, despite how good they looked on Friday night. So hopefully the Mets can even up this series. And then you get to Sunday and it's Sean Manaea versus TBD. We still don't know. It would have been Jared Jones. He's on the IL. They replaced him with a position player, and they're playing right now with a not really a man down because they still have 8 men in the bullpen, but a man down in the rotation. So are they going to go with the bullpen game and try to just use the bullpen to get themselves through the All-Star break, or are they going to call on somebody from AAA to make a spot start? We still don't know. In either situation, the Mets should have an edge with Manaea on the mound. So if you handle business and you win those first 2 games, then yeah, you got a much tougher matchup on Monday going up against Mitch Keller, and that's a game the Mets might not win. But if they get out of this series and they take 2 of the final 3, I'd be okay with it. And really look at the slate until the All-Star break. While we wanted to see the Mets create great separation in the wild card race, at this point, just get to the All-Star break with your head above water. And to me, that means you almost flush Friday's game, and you look at it as you have 3 3-game series before you get to the All-Star break. 3 more against the Pirates, 3 against the Nationals at home, 3 against the Rockies at home. Win each of those series. Granted, of course, this one would just be splitting a 4-game setup. If they can take 6 of the next 9 games, go into the break, that would make them what? They're 2 games under right now, so that would put them at what? A game over? Quick math on that. I'm not great at that, but close to it, right? All right, let me look at the standings. Let me do this really quick. They're what? 44 and 46? The top of my head. No, excuse me. 42 and 44. So if they went 6-3 over the final games, that'd make them 48 and 47. Oh, the 2 games over. If they can do that, by all means, that would be a pretty good close to the first half of the season. You come out of the break, you play 4 against the Marlins on the road. You got the Yankees on that slate as well. But if the Mets can just keep themselves over 500 or get themselves back to over 500 by the break and play a good final 2 weeks before the deadline, they're not going to be sellers, and they might even conservatively buy in a couple of areas. But they have 22 games left until the deadline to make something happen and to avoid being sellers. And I don't know which way is the better one for this franchise. You can absolutely make the case that this team should sell what they can, take advantage of that position one more time, and go into next year as strong as possible. But I want to enjoy good baseball for the rest of this season. So hopefully we get a little bit more of that version of the Mets that we've seen throughout June and in spurts throughout this year in general that can play some really good ball and can keep themselves in this race. But they're 3.5 games out now. They were on the doorstep of a playoff position a week ago, and now you've gone 2-5 over 7 games here. This could be disastrous. This could be a stretch where you look back on the season and say, man, how did the Mets not take advantage of their schedule? But none of these teams are giving games away. The Pirates still believe that they're in it. The Nationals still believe that they're in it. And the Rockies are still a frisky team that isn't good, but any team can be good for a series. It's not that they have complete scrubs over there. There's still big league players that can beat you. So you got to handle business. You got to do what you're supposed to. Let's see if this lineup can start hitting again, and if the bullpen can be solidified with Diaz back into the fold. Hopefully it's a fun weekend of Mets baseball, and I'll be there with you throughout the entire ride. Make sure you check out tomorrow's show. If you're listening on the audio side, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We want to get to 9,000 subs by the All-Star break. We're thin 100 right now, so I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. You can also follow me on social at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen to your first watch every day, not for your second watch. Head over to YouTube. Check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Of course, I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today, which is also streaming 24/7 on Amazon Fire TV.